It's been said that the value of a good work can be measured by the amount of good it does for others. Well, put that thinking to the test today and examine some unique qualities of true Christians. Next on Grace to You. When a church group feeds the needy, you'd probably say that's a good deed. When Hollywood celebrities raise money for charity, that seems like a good deed too. But if, for example, a hardened, unrepentant criminal donates a large sum to a worthy cause, how would you describe that deed? Well, actually, we need to back up and take another look at it and ask the question, what really constitutes a good deed, and why is understanding that important? Today on Grace to You, John Macarthur offers a perspective that you may have never considered. He's evaluating the distinctive qualities of the true Christian. This lesson today, a part of the study on Grace to You called The Road to Nowhere. And with John's lesson today, he's asking you to join him in Philippians chapter 3.
Paul says, keep on rejoicing in the Lord. That's a command and a characteristic of a true believer. And having punctuated his major theme, he then moves into what's on his heart in this new subject. And he begins with an introduction in verse 1. He says, to write the same things again is no trouble to me, and it is a safeguard for you. So he is saying, I want to provide this for you so you won't trip, you won't fall, you won't be overthrown. This will be your protection, your dependable safeguard. Well, this is part of Paul's duty, isn't it? Paul is no dumb dog, as it mentions in Isaiah 56:10. He's no irresponsible watchman, as we would see in Ezekiel. Paul is a faithful man to warn his people. In fact, in Acts 20, he says, I have not ceased to warn you at Ephesus night and day with tears for the space of 3 years. I've warned you about perverse men rising up from within. I've warned you about grievous wolves from without. A warning ministry was a part of his life. He says, I have no trouble in warning you again because it will protect you. Now, who is he warning about? Who is he talking about? Well, let's find out in verse 2. He uses the word blepete in the Greek, beware, 3 times. All 3 times in the imperative. Beware, beware, beware. You could translate it, be on the constant lookout for. Be on the constant lookout for dogs, evil workers, and here's the key, the mutilation. Who's he talking about? Well, if you take that mutilation at the end of verse 2, which is translated in the NAS, the false circumcision, and then you compare it with verse 3, the true circumcision, we know who he's talking about. May I remind you that the Jews believed that circumcision was the sign of God's favor, right? That if they had that physical operation, that was the external identification that they were the seed of Abraham and thus they were to be blessed. They somehow missed the point that the outward circumcision was only to be a symbol of the circumcision on the inside. But the Jews had long departed from the reality of circumcision's symbolism and left themselves committed only to the symbol. Now let me tell you what happened. You have a Jewish community who believe in circumcision as the mark that is necessary for God's people. They also believe in the Old Testament economy. They believe in the Mosaic ceremonies. They believe in the Mosaic rituals and laws, and they feel that they are bound to keep them. So here comes the Apostle Paul, right? He comes into the Gentile world and he preaches salvation by grace plus or minus nothing. No works at all. There's nothing you can do, nothing you must do. You're saved by grace, period. God's marvelous grace. In an act of faith, you simply receive the gift of grace. The work has all been done. So Paul goes through the Gentile world. People come to the knowledge of the grace of the gospel. They are saved. Churches begin. There are even Jews who believe the gospel. They believe Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that Jesus died on the cross. They may believe that he was raised from the dead. But they also believe that in order to be pleasing to God and to have God accept you, you have to be circumcised and keep all the ceremonies of Moses. So when Paul goes along and says the old covenant has been set aside, circumcision is unnecessary, Mosaic ceremony is unnecessary, you cannot do any externals to please God or gain your salvation, they are very upset, these Jews. And so no sooner does Paul leave town after establishing a church than they rise up and say to that church, you must be circumcised and we'll show you why. And they point to the Old Testament. You must keep the ceremonies of Moses. I'll show you why. They point to the Old Testament. And because some of the younger Christians are undiscerning about the old economy and the new, they are confused by these commands that are in the Bible. They do not understand that they have been set aside in the new covenant. And so these Jewish people are then leading Christians to believe that in order to be saved, they must be circumcised. In order to be saved, they must do certain ceremonial things and perform certain good works. And this is being propagated not only to the church, but to those who are around the church showing interest in it. And it is a gospel that convolutes the true gospel because it says Christ, yes, circumcision, yes, and works, yes. And these became known as what? These teachers were called what? Judaizers. Because they were Judaizing. In other words, they were saying you can't come in to Christianity unless you go through the foyer of Judaism. You can't be a Gentile and just come to Christ. You've got to be circumcised and you've got to follow Mosaic economy and subscribe to that. This was a big issue in the early church. To show you the proportions of it, turn for a moment to the 15th chapter of Acts. Acts chapter 15, verse 1. This sums it up. Some men came down from Judea and began teaching the brethren. Here's what they taught. Unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. That's right. That's it. And when Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, because they denied that. You didn't need to be circumcised to be saved. So the debate. Well, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders concerning the issue, and thus the first church council was held, the council at Jerusalem, and the whole issue was about